What happens when a sacred promise to an unborn child is stolen? For Millionaire's wife. Eleanor Vance, the name chosen for her son, was everything a legacy, a tribute, a bond. But she didn't know her husband's mistress, Chloe, had a twisted plan. In an act of unimaginable cruelty, Chloe gave birth first and secretly registered her own baby under the very same name, attempting to replace Eleanor and her child in the family history. But Chloe underestimated the wrath of a mother. Eleanor wouldn't just get even. She would get a global audience exposing the betrayal live on national television in a confrontation nobody would ever forget. Eleanor Vance believed in the architecture of a perfect life because she had built one. Her world, viewed from the penthouse of their Columbus Circle apartment, was a panorama of glittering success. The lights of Manhattan sprawled below her like a carpet of scattered diamonds, a constant reminder of the heights she and her husband, Julian Croft, had reached. At 34, Eleanor was the epitome of curated elegance, poised, intelligent, and now 8 months pregnant, carrying the heir to the Croft fortune with a serene grace that belied the quiet anxieties nesting in her heart. Their story was the kind magazines paid to feature. Julian, a charismatic force of nature, had clawed his way up from a working-class background in Queens to become a titan of private equity. He was handsome, with a predator's smile and eyes that could disarm world leaders and intimidate rivals with a single glance. Eleanor, by contrast, was old money, raised between a sprawling estate in the Hamptons and a pre-war building on Park Avenue. She'd met Julian at a charity gala, her calm confidence a soothing balm to his restless ambition. They were a power couple, their marriage a merger of legacy and drive. Now their final acquisition was on the horizon, a son. They had already chosen his name, a decision Eleanor held sacred. He would be Thomas Maxwell Vance. Thomas for her late grandfather, a philanthropist and patriarch, who had taught her the meaning of quiet strength. Maxwell for Julian's own father, a man who had worked himself into an early grave, laying bricks so his son could one day build empires. The name was a bridge between their worlds, a symbol of the dynasty they were creating. Eleanor would often wander into the nursery, a masterpiece of soft blues and cream, and whisper the name into the still air. "Thomas Maxwell," she would say, her hand resting on the swell of her belly. "We're all waiting for you." But lately the architecture of her perfect life had begun to show hairline cracks. It started subtly. Julian, once a man who craved home, began staying out later. The excuses were always plausible, delivered with that charming, weary smile of his. "The Singapore deal is a monster, Elle. We're in the final stretch." Or, "Had to take the board out for dinner. You know how it is." He would return late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, unidentifiable perfume that wasn't hers. He'd kiss her forehead, his lips cool and distracted, his eyes already on the stock ticker glowing on his phone. The emotional distance grew wider than their king-sized bed. He stopped asking about the baby's kicks, his attention drifting when she spoke of her doctor's appointments. He'd buy her extravagant just because gifts, a Cartier bracelet, a vintage Chanel bag that felt less like tokens of affection and more like payments for his absence. They were beautiful, expensive apologies for sins he hadn't yet confessed. One evening, as Eleanor arranged a bouquet of white peonies in the foyer, she overheard him on the phone in his study, his voice low and urgent. "No, you can't call me here," he hissed. "I told you that. Just be patient. I'll handle everything." He emerged a moment later, his face a mask of practiced calm. "Everything all right, darling?" she asked, her voice steady. "Just a junior associate getting ahead of herself," he said, waving a dismissive hand. Ambitious, but needs to learn the chain of command. He walked over and kissed her, but the gesture felt hollow, a performance for an audience of one. The junior associate had a name, Chloe Sterling. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but she would soon. Chloe was 26, with hungry eyes, and the kind of fierce ambition that Julian once saw in his own reflection. She worked in the mergers and acquisitions department at Croft Capital, a place where only the sharpest survived. And Chloe was sharper than a shard of glass. She saw Julian not just as her boss, but as a prize to be won, a life to be claimed. She studied Eleanor from afar, poring over society columns and Instagram posts, learning her tastes, her habits, her world. She was a predator, learning her praise patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment had already passed. The affair had been going on for 6 months. It had started with late nights at the office, a shared bottle of scotch, and Julian's intoxicating complaints about the pressures of his life pressures. Chloe was all too eager to soothe. To Julian it was a dalliance, a temporary escape from the impending weight of fatherhood and the quiet perfection of a life he sometimes felt he didn't deserve. To Chloe it was an audition, and as Eleanor stood in her perfect home, arranging perfect flowers for her perfect life, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze. The cracks were spreading, and she was terrified that if she pressed too hard, the entire facade would shatter. The name Thomas Maxwell echoed in her mind, no longer a promise, but a prayer. The next few weeks were a masterclass in gaslighting. Julian became a phantom in his own home, his presence fleeting, his explanations for his absences becoming more elaborate. The Singapore deal became his all-encompassing alibi, a convenient black hole that absorbed his time, his attention, and his integrity. The time difference is brutal. He'd sigh, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair as he scrolled through emails at the breakfast table. I was on a conference call until 4 a.m. Eleanor, armed with an Ivy League education in art history and a lifetime of observing the subtle tells of the upper class, began to collect data. She was not a fool, and she would not be made into one. She noticed the second phone, a sleek burner-style smartphone he kept in his briefcase and claimed was for international clients to avoid roaming charges. A flimsy excuse for a man who owned a private jet. One afternoon, a credit card statement arrived, not the joint account, but his personal black card. It was usually handled by his assistant, but this one had been mailed to the house by mistake. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she slit open the envelope. She told herself she was just being organized, but she was looking for something, and she found it. Amidst the charges for 5-star restaurants and Savile Row suits were entries that made no sense. A dinner for 2 at Perse on a night he was supposedly working through dinner at the office. A charge from a lingerie boutique on Madison Avenue, a shop Eleanor had never stepped foot in. And then the one that made her blood run cold, a recurring charge for a luxury serviced apartment in Tribeca. Not a hotel, an apartment. A nest. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was no longer an abstract fear. It was a set of coordinates, a paper trail leading to a life he was living without her. The name Chloe Sterling surfaced in her mind, dredged up from a fleeting memory of Julian mentioning a brilliant new analyst. That evening she decided to follow him. It felt cheap, pathetic something out of a daytime soap opera, but she had to know. After he kissed her goodbye, murmuring about a late-night session with the lawyers, she waited 10 minutes and then hailed a cab, her swollen belly, a painful reminder of everything that was at stake. She directed the driver to the Tribeca address. Her hands clenched so tightly in her lap, her knuckles were white. The building was a sleek, anonymous tower of glass and steel. She didn't have to wait long. Julian's black town car pulled up to the curb. He got out, but he wasn't alone. A young woman emerged from the passenger side, laughing at something he'd said. She was beautiful in a sharp, hungry way, with a cascade of dark hair and a body that was all sharp angles and lean lines. She looped her arm through his, her head resting on his shoulder with an intimacy that felt like a physical blow to Eleanor. It was Chloe Sterling. Eleanor watched from the shadows of her taxi as they disappeared into the building, their silhouettes merging into one. The doorman greeted them with a familiar nod. This was their routine. This was their home. She didn't cry. The pain was too sharp, too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard certainty that settled in her bones. The life she had so carefully constructed was a lie. The man she loved, the father of her child, was a stranger. Driving back to their empty penthouse, the city lights blurred into meaningless streaks of color. She walked into the nursery, the soft blues and grays now feeling cold and mocking. The name Thomas Maxwell stuck in her throat. It was a name for a family, for a unit built on love and trust. What was it now? A brand name for a broken enterprise. The next day, Julian returned in the early morning, feigning exhaustion from his all-night negotiation. Eleanor was waiting for him in the living room, the credit card statement laid out on the marble coffee table like a verdict. "I think you and I need to have a talk about the Singapore deal," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "And I want you to tell me about your brilliant new analyst, Chloe Sterling." The color drained from Julian's face. The charming facade crumbled, revealing the panicked, guilty man beneath. The architect of a billion-dollar empire had just seen his own foundation turn to dust. The confrontation was not the screaming match Eleanor had envisioned. There was no throwing of priceless vases, no torrent of tears. Her fury was a glacier, immense, silent and moving with unstoppable force. She sat on the cream-colored sofa, a portrait of unnerving stillness, and simply waited for him to speak. Julian, for the first time in his life, was stripped of his power. His usual tools, charm, intimidation, money, were useless against her cold, quiet judgment. He stumbled through the confession, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "It was a mistake, Elle. A stupid, meaningless mistake. It didn't mean anything. I was under so much pressure. I felt—" He trailed off, unable to articulate his own weakness. Eleanor listened without interruption, her gaze unwavering. She let his excuses hang in the air until they disintegrated under their own pathetic weight. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up dry cleaning, Julian," she said, finally her voice cutting through his stammering. "A 6-month affair with a subordinate in a secret apartment is a campaign of deceit. It is a choice you made every single day." He collapsed onto the ottoman before her, his head in his hands. He looked broken, a fallen king in his own castle. "I'll end it." He pleaded, his voice thick with a desperation she knew was genuine. The threat of losing her, of losing the perfect life he'd worked so hard to acquire, was real to him now. "Today, it's over. I'll fire her. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, Eleanor, don't leave me. Not now. Not with the baby coming." The baby. Thomas. He was the anchor in this storm, the only reason she was even sitting here. The thought of bringing her son into a shattered home of his first days, being defined by divorce lawyers and custody battles, was unbearable. She had a responsibility to her child that superseded her own agony. She looked at Julian, truly looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a deeply flawed man. A man whose ambition had become a cancer, metastasizing into his personal life. Perhaps this was the shock his system needed. Perhaps the fear of losing everything would be enough to make him the man she thought she had married. It was a gamble, but for Thomas, she was willing to take it. "You will end it," she stated, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You will sever all contact. She will be gone from your company by the end of the day. You will sell the apartment in Tribeca, and you will give me complete, unrestricted access to all your phones, emails, and accounts. There will be no more secrets, Julian. Not one." He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and shame. "Yes, of course. Anything. And you will go to therapy," she added. "With me. We will deal with this. But I am not forgiving you, Julian. Not yet. You will earn back my trust. It will be the hardest deal you have ever closed." So began the period of reconstruction. Julian, true to his word, moved with ruthless efficiency. Chloe Sterling was fired a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement, her parting gifts. The Tribeca love nest was put on the market. Julian surrendered his second phone and passwords, submitting to Eleanor's new regime of transparency with the humility of a penitent. Life settled into a new, fragile rhythm. They attended therapy sessions, where Julian spoke haltingly of his fears of inadequacy, of his constant need to conquer a trait that had made him a billionaire but a poor husband. Eleanor listened, her heart a walled-off fortress, letting in only what was necessary for the rebuilding process. She focused on the baby. She finalized the nursery decor, she attended her Lamaze classes, she read books on motherhood. She was building a new life, a life centered on her son, and Julian was for now a provisional part of it. But she wasn't naive. She knew that cutting out a tumor didn't guarantee the cancer wouldn't return. While Julian seemed sincere, she could not shake the feeling that this was only an intermission, not the end of the play. What she didn't know was that she was absolutely right, because in firing Chloe Sterling, Julian had not excised a problem. He had created a rogue agent. Chloe was not the type of woman to be discarded and paid off. She had invested 6 months of her life in the Julian Croft project, and she would not see her investment yield nothing. As she packed up her desk at Croft Capital, a cold, vengeful fury burned within her. She had lost the battle, but she was already planning how to win the war. And she held an ace up her sleeve, a piece of information that would soon become a weapon of mass destruction. She too was pregnant. Or at least that's what she would make Julian believe. Chloe Sterling did not go quietly into the night. She went to a 5-star hotel paid for with Julian's generous severance and plotted. She was a strategist, and she knew that a direct assault on Eleanor was futile. Eleanor had the home, the ring, the societal standing. So Chloe would attack from a different angle. She would target the one thing they were meant to share, the legacy. A few weeks after her dismissal, she made her move. She called Julian on his private line, a number she had memorized. He answered, his voice tense. "Chloe, how did you get this number I told you not to contact me?" "Don't worry, Julian," she said, her voice a silky blend of vulnerability and steel. "I'm not calling to cause trouble. I signed your little NDA. I'm just calling to tell you something you have a right to know." She paused for dramatic effect. "I'm pregnant, and it's yours." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Julian felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Another baby. A secret baby. It was a catastrophe, a complication that could unravel the fragile peace he had brokered with Eleanor. "That's not possible," he stammered. "We were careful." "Careful isn't perfect, Julian. You know that. Better than anyone," she cooed. "I'm 12 weeks along. I just found out. I don't want anything from you. I just thought you should know." It was a lie, of course. She wasn't pregnant. But she knew how to create the illusion of truth. A faked sonogram from a shady online service, a few well-placed comments about morning sickness, it was all part of the trap. Her real plan was far more insidious. She was already in the early stages of a private adoption, seeking out a newborn she could pass off as her own. She was manufacturing a reality, and Julian was her first and most important believer. He was horrified. He begged her to keep it quiet, offered her money, anything to make the problem go away. And Chloe, playing the part of the reluctant, heartbroken victim, agreed. "I don't want your money, Julian," she said, her voice laced with false nobility. "This is my baby. I'll raise it myself. I won't be a problem for you and your perfect wife." This, of course, only made Julian feel more guilty and, crucially, more indebted to her. He started sending her money for the baby's expenses, he told himself. He began taking her calls, listening as she spoke about her pregnancy, her hopes and fears. He was being drawn back into her web, not through Sashan this time, but through a misguided sense of responsibility. He was trying to manage a crisis, but he was only feeding the monster. He kept all of this a secret from Eleanor. Their therapy-mandated transparency had its limits, and this secret was too radioactive to disclose. He was living a double life again, not of infidelity, but of deception. Chloe's masterstroke came during one of these clandestine calls. She spoke to Julian in a soft, wistful voice about choosing a name for her baby. A son she now claimed to know it was. "It's so hard to do this alone," she sighed. "You and Eleanor. You probably have the perfect name picked out already. Something strong and classic, I bet." Julian, caught off guard and softened by guilt, made his fatal error. "We do," he said quietly. "We're going to call him Thomas Maxwell, after her grandfather and my father." The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. He had shared something sacred, something that belonged to him and Eleanor, with this woman. But it was too late. On the other end of the line, Chloe smiled. It was a cold, triumphant smile. She had it. The key. The one thing that would bind her to Julian forever. The one thing that would wound Eleanor in a way no affair ever could. She now knew the name of their most precious asset. Her plan crystallized. Through her adoption channels, she found an expectant mother due to give birth a few weeks before Eleanor's due date. It was a boy. The timing was perfect. She would steal their son's name. She would register her adopted child as Thomas Maxwell Sterling. By the time Eleanor and Julian's son was born, his intended name would already belong to the son of the mistress. It was a power play of breathtaking cruelty. A way to ensure that every time Julian looked at his legitimate son, he would be reminded of his illegitimate one. She wouldn't just be a footnote in his history. She would be a co-author of its next chapter. She was not just stealing a name. She was stealing a legacy. The final weeks of Eleanor's pregnancy were on the surface idyllic. Julian was a changed man. He was attentive, doting, and present in a way he hadn't been for over a year. He massaged her swollen feet. He personally oversaw the final touches on the nursery, and he spoke to her belly, promising his son the world. Eleanor, wanting to believe in this second chance, allowed herself to hope. The glacier of her fury had begun to thaw just a little. She mistook his overcompensation, born of a new and terrible secret, for genuine redemption. Meanwhile, in a private hospital across town, Chloe Sterling's plan was coming to fruition. The adoption was finalized. She held the newborn boy in her arms, a child with no knowledge of the twisted role he was about to play. He was a prop in her revenge fantasy. She filled out the birth registration forms with a steady hand, her handwriting a confident, elegant script. First name, Thomas, middle name, Maxwell. Last name, Sterling. She looked down at the document, a wave of dark satisfaction washing over her. It was done. She had staked her flag. She had created a fact, an unerasable entry in the public record. She sent a photo of the birth certificate to Julian with a simple message, "Meet your son. Thomas Maxwell Sterling. Born today." Julian saw the message while he was in a board meeting. He felt the blood drain from his face. He excused himself, stumbling into his private bathroom, and stared at the image on his phone, his breath catching in his throat. She had actually done it. She had taken their name. The name meant to honor his dead father and her beloved grandfather. It was a desecration. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. His first instinct was to tell Eleanor to confess everything and face the consequences, but he couldn't. He imagined her face, the hope in her eyes, replaced by that look of cold, shattered disappointment. He pictured the walls of their carefully reconstructed life crumbling to dust. He couldn't bear it. He had come so far in winning back her trust. This would destroy it all. So he made another choice. The coward's choice. He decided to say nothing. He called Chloe, his voice a furious whisper. "What have you done? You can't do this, Chloe. You have to change it." "Why?" she replied, her voice cool and composed. "I love the name. It felt right. Strong. It's just a name. Julian. Surely there are other names in the world." "It's not just a name. It's our name," he hissed. "It's my son's name now," she corrected him. "And he is your son too. Don't forget us that." He was trapped. She knew it. He couldn't expose her lie about the baby's paternity without revealing his own affair and subsequent deception. He couldn't force her to change the name without a legal battle that would make everything public. He was completely and utterly outmaneuvered. "Don't tell her, Julian," Chloe warned, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It would break her heart. Just pick a new name. It's for the best. This will be our secret." He hung up his mind, reeling. Pick a new name. The simplicity of her suggestion was insulting. How could he go to Eleanor now, a week before her due date, and tell her they had to abandon the name they had cherished for months? What reason could he possibly give? His silence was the only option, a ticking time bomb he prayed would never detonate. A week later, Eleanor went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, but at dawn on a crisp November morning, their son arrived. He was perfect, with a fuzz of dark hair, like Julian's and Eleanor's calm, observant eyes. As they laid him in her arms, all the pain and fear of the past year melted away, replaced by a wave of love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Hello, Thomas Maxwell Vance." Julian stood beside her, his face a complicated mask of joy and terror. He looked at his son, his beautiful, legitimate son, and all he could see was the ghost of the other, Thomas the stolen one. The secret was a physical weight pressing down on him, suffocating him. The next day, the hospital registrar came to their private suite with the official paperwork for the birth certificate. It was a cheerful, bureaucratic woman who had no idea she was about to detonate a bomb. "All right, folks, let's get this little man official," she said, pen poised. "Name of the father, Julian Croft. Name of the mother, Eleanor Vance. "And the name of the baby, Thomas Maxwell Vance," Eleanor said, beaming with pride. The registrar typed the name into her tablet. Her brow furrowed slightly. She typed it again. "That's funny," she murmured. "We're getting a flag in the system. Hold on a moment." "A flag?" Eleanor asked, her smile faltering. "What kind of flag?" "Sometimes it happens with common names," the woman said, still typing. "But this is specific. The system is linking the name Thomas Maxwell to the father's details, Julian Croft, and flagging it as a potential duplicate registration within the last 30 days. Did you recently register another child, Mr. Croft?" Time stopped. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. Eleanor turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto Julian's. His face was ashen, his expression one of pure, unadulterated horror. He couldn't speak. He could only stand there as his world and hers finally and irrevocably came crashing down. "Julian," Eleanor's voice was a whisper, but it carried the force of a landslide. "What is she talking about?" The hospital room, once a sanctuary of new life, became a courtroom. The registrar, sensing the sudden glacial tension, quickly gathered her things. I'll come back later," she stammered, backing out of the room and closing the door, leaving them to the deafening silence. Eleanor's gaze never left Julian's face. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence was an indictment. In her arms, the baby, their son, began to stir, blissfully unaware that his very identity was at the center of a war. "Julian," she said again, her voice dangerously calm. "Tell me what she was talking about. Now." And so the whole sordid story came tumbling out. Not just the affair which she already knew about, but the second act of the tragedy. The lie about Chloe's pregnancy, the secret phone calls, the money, and finally, the ultimate betrayal, Chloe's deliberate theft of their son's name. He confessed that he had known about it for a week, that he had stood by her side during labor, letting her whisper the stolen name to their child, all while knowing it had been poisoned. Eleanor listened without a single tear. Her grief was too profound for that. It was a hollow, echoing chasm that had opened up inside her. The man she had tried to forgive, the man she had gambled on for the sake of her son, was weaker and more deceitful than she could have ever imagined. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been a coward. He had protected his own comfort at the expense of her heart and their son's legacy. When he finished, the only sound was the soft breathing of the baby. "Get out," she said. "Eleanor, please. Get out." Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was forged from steel. "Get out of this room. Get out of my sight. Send my lawyer a text. Tell him to meet me here in 1 hour. We will be discussing the terms of our divorce." Julian, finally understanding the totality of his ruin, turned and walked out. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Eleanor was alone with her son. She looked down at his perfect, innocent face. He was not Thomas Maxwell. That name was tainted, sullied, a monument to betrayal. He deserved a name that was clean, strong, and entirely his own. A name that represented his mother's resilience, not his father's weakness. The grief, when it finally came, was not a flood, but a single hot tear that traced a path down her cheek and fell onto the baby's blanket. In that moment, something shifted within her. The pain began to cool, to harden, crystallizing into a diamond of pure, unadulterated rage. A simple divorce was not enough. Money was not enough. Julian's humiliation was a start, but it was not the goal. The true villain here was Chloe Sterling. The woman who had used a child, an adopted child, no less, as a weapon. A woman who had perverted the sacred act of naming a baby into an act of psychological warfare. She could not be allowed to get away with it. Eleanor's mind, always sharp and strategic, began to work. She needed to expose Chloe, but not in a messy private drama that could be spun and manipulated by PR teams. She needed a stage, a big one. She needed to control the narrative so completely that there would be no ambiguity, no room for doubt. An idea began to form, audacious and terrifying in its scope. A week from now, Julian was scheduled for the biggest media appearance of his career. He was to be the keynote guest on The Croft Report, a primetime special on CNBC, hosted by the legendary financial journalist Nolan Vance, no relation, a bitter irony, celebrating Julian's deal of the decade, the very Singapore acquisition he had used as a cover for his affair. It was meant to be his coronation, the moment he ascended from a mere millionaire to a global icon. Millions would be watching. The entire business world would be tuned in. It would not be his coronation. It would be his execution. And Eleanor would be the one to wield the sword. She picked up her phone, her fingers moving with newfound purpose. Her first call was not to her lawyer, but to her best friend, Sarah, a top-tier publicist. "Sarah," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I need your help. I'm about to do something crazy, and I need to make sure the whole world is watching." She looked down at her son again, her vow silent but absolute. "They tried to erase you, my love. They tried to make you a sequel to their sordid story. But I will make you the start of a new one. Your story. And it will begin with your mother, taking back everything they tried to steal." She would give him a new name later, a better one. But first she had to burn the old world down. The week leading up to the interview was a blur of calculated maneuvers. While the world believed Eleanor Vance was a heartbroken new mother, secluded in her penthouse, she was in fact a general commanding a covert operation. Her first move was to play the part of the reconciled wife, but with a chilling twist. She allowed Julian back into the apartment, but not into her bed or her heart. He was a ghost in their home, desperate to placate her, and she used his guilt like a scalpel. Nolan Vance's producer called. She told him one evening, her voice coolly neutral as she rocked the baby, whom she now simply called my son. "They want to do a short, pre-taped segment with me, the supportive wife behind the great man. I told them I wasn't up to it." Panic flickered in Julian's eyes. Her absence from the broadcast would raise questions. "Elle, you have to. It'll look strange if you don't. Please. It's the most important night of my career." "Is it?" she asked, her eyebrow arched. "More important than the day your son was born?" She let the question hang in the air before relenting. "Fine. For the sake of appearances, I will do it. But on one condition. I don't want to be pre-taped. I want to be there. Live." Julian, desperate for any semblance of normalcy, readily agreed. "Of course. Anything. It will be perfect. Us together. A family." He was a fool, seeing only what he wanted to see. He didn't realize he was helping her load the gun he would soon be staring down the barrel of. Next, Eleanor, with her publicist Sarah's help, began gathering her ammunition. They hired a discreet private investigator who, in less than 48 hours, delivered a comprehensive dossier on Chloe Sterling. The key finding was explosive confirmation through hospital sources and adoption agency leaks that Chloe's baby was not biologically hers. She had not given birth. She had orchestrated an adoption. The lie she had told Julian about her pregnancy was a calculated fraud from the very beginning. Eleanor now held the ultimate weapon. Chloe hadn't just acted out of spite. She had committed deliberate, malicious fraud to ensnare Julian and terrorize his wife. The final piece of the puzzle was the stage itself. Sarah, using her extensive network, reached out to a junior producer on Nolan Vance's show, a young woman she had mentored years ago. She didn't reveal the whole plan, just enough to pique her interest. "Eleanor Vance has a story to tell," Sarah said cryptically over coffee. "A story that will be the biggest scoop of your career. It involves Julian Croft, but it's much bigger than a business deal. She wants to tell it live on your show. All you have to do is make sure the cameras are on her when she decides to speak." The producer, sensing a career-making moment, agreed. A secret signal was arranged. When Eleanor touched her pearl necklace, the director would switch to a tight shot on her and ensure her microphone was live. On the day of the broadcast, Eleanor transformed herself. She chose a dress in a striking sapphire blue, a color of royalty and power. Her hair was styled in elegant waves, her makeup flawless. She was not a victim. She was a Valkyrie. In her purse, she carried 2 documents, a copy of Chloe's adopted son's birth certificate and the PI's report confirming the fraud. Julian, seeing her, was breathless with relief. "You look stunning, Elle," he said, trying to take her hand. She allowed it, her touch as cold as marble. As they rode in the town car to the television studio, he practiced his talking points about market disruption and fiscal strategy. Eleanor remained silent. Her mind focused, her heart beating a steady rhythmic drum of anticipation. She was about to walk into the lion's den, but she was the one with the teeth. In her Upper West Side apartment, Chloe Sterling poured herself a glass of champagne. She was watching the pre-show commentary on CNBC, her adopted son, sleeping in his crib. Tonight, Julian would be celebrated, and she knew that every time he thought of his success, he would be thinking of his 2 sons, named Thomas, the legitimate, and the secret. It was her victory, a permanent mark she had left on his life. She settled onto her sofa, ready to watch the show, completely unaware that she was not an observer, but the star of the coming execution. The whole world was about to learn her name. The CNBC studio buzzed with a controlled, high-stakes energy. Nolan Vance, a silver-haired journalist with a reputation for incisive questions, greeted Julian with a warm, firm handshake. "Julian, good to have you. And Eleanor, you look radiant. It's wonderful to have you here supporting him. He's the man of the hour." Eleanor replied, her smile a perfect, polished mask. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." They were led to the set 2 plush armchairs, facing Nolan's desk, with the iconic, glowing backdrop of the stock market behind them. Eleanor was seated slightly behind, and to the side of Julian, the classic position of the adoring, silent partner. The floor director began the countdown. 10 seconds to air. 5, 4, 3. The cameras went live. Nolan Vance opened with a glowing tribute to Julian's genius, detailing the complex multi-billion-dollar Singapore deal. Julian, in his element, leaned forward, speaking with his usual confidence about synergy leverage and shareholder value. He was magnetic, the very picture of a modern captain of industry. Eleanor watched him, her expression one of quiet pride. She let the first segment play out, allowing the narrative of Julian Croft, the brilliant visionary, to build to its crescendo. The producer in the control room was getting nervous, wondering if she had been played. Then Nolan turned his attention to her. "Eleanor, people see this incredible success, but they don't see the sacrifice. Julian has been working around the clock on this. It must have been difficult, especially with a new baby on the way." This was her moment. "It's been a challenging time." Eleanor began, her voice smooth as silk. Julian smiled, expecting a platitude. But Julian and I have always believed in the importance of legacy, of building something that lasts. That's why the birth of our son was so momentous for us. She paused, her fingers moving to the string of pearls at her neck. She touched the center pearl. In the control booth, the junior producer yelled, "Now camera 2 on her, and bring up her mic." The camera zoomed in, pushing Julian to the edge of the frame. The shot was now an intimate close-up of Eleanor. She looked directly into the lens as if speaking to each of the millions of viewers personally. "We chose a name for him that was deeply meaningful," she continued, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "Thomas Maxwell, for our fathers, a name to honor family integrity and trust." Julian's smile froze on his face. He shifted uncomfortably. Nolan Vance looked intrigued. "But what my husband has failed to mention in his story of success," Eleanor went on, her eyes like chips of ice, "is that his work on the Singapore deal involved more than just late nights at the office. It involved a junior analyst named Chloe Sterling, and it involved a secret apartment in Tribeca." A collective gasp went through the studio. In the control room, the lead producer was screaming, "What is happening? Stay on her!" Nolan Vance's jaw was slack with shock. Julian looked as if he had been turned to stone. "You see," Eleanor said, her voice dropping slightly, creating an effect of chilling intimacy, "my husband's affair was a betrayal I was willing for the sake of my child to try and move past. But some actions are unforgivable." She reached into her purse and pulled out the copy of the birth certificate, holding it up for the camera to see. "This is the birth certificate for a boy named Thomas Maxwell Sterling. He was registered 3 weeks ago by Chloe Sterling. My husband's mistress took the name we chose for our son and gave it to hers in a calculated, cruel attempt to secure her place in his life." The studio was in an uproar. Nolan Vance, recovering, leaned into his microphone. "Mrs. Croft, are you saying—" "I'm saying my husband, a man celebrated tonight for his vision, stood by and allowed this to happen," Eleanor said, her gaze shifting to Julian, who was now visibly sweating under the hot studio lights. "He kept it a secret from me. I only found out when I went to register my own son, and the hospital computer flagged his name as a duplicate. Imagine that. Your child's identity stolen before he even has a chance to own it." She wasn't finished. She pulled out the second document. "And for anyone who thinks Miss Sterling is just another heartbroken woman, let me be clear. Our investigator has confirmed that her child is adopted. Her entire pregnancy was a fraud, a lie she told to manipulate my husband and terrorize me. She used an innocent child as a pawn in her sick game." She placed the documents on the table. "So yes, Nolan Julian has achieved a great deal. He has successfully brokered a deal built on lies. He has successfully fathered a son whose name he allowed to be stolen. And he has successfully destroyed his family in front of millions of people." She stood up, a figure of immense and terrible dignity. "I will be filing for divorce tomorrow morning, and I will be giving my son a new name, a name that stands for strength and truth, something his father and his father's mistress clearly know nothing about." With that, she turned and walked off the set. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel the heat of the fire she had just started, a blaze that would consume Julian Croft's reputation, Chloe Sterling's future, and the entire architecture of their false lives. The cameras stayed on Julian's face, pale and frozen in a rictus of utter humiliation, broadcasting his ruin in high definition to a stunned and captivated world. The king had been dethroned on his coronation day. The seconds after Eleanor walked off set were pure chaos. The live broadcast abruptly cut to a commercial, but the damage was done. The internet exploded. Eleanor Vance Croft report and Chloe the fraud became the top 3 trending topics worldwide within minutes. Eleanor's calm surgical takedown was clipped, memed, and analyzed on every platform, transforming her overnight from a society wife into a cultural icon of righteous fury. She was hailed as a queen, a warrior, a phoenix rising. For Julian, the aftermath was a free fall into personal and professional hell. His phone lit up with frantic calls from board members, investors, and his PR team. But he couldn't answer. He sat paralyzed in his armchair under the hot studio lights, the ghost of his career evaporating before his eyes. The deal of the decade became the scandal of the century. The investors, repulsed by the public display of his profound moral failings, pulled their support. Croft Capital's stock went into a nosedive from which it would never recover. The board, in a desperate act of damage control, demanded his resignation. The empire he had built with relentless ambition was dismantled in less than a week by a truth he had been too cowardly to tell. He lost his company, his reputation, and his family in a single televised implosion. He became a cautionary tale, a symbol of how quickly a titan could fall. Chloe Sterling's fate was equally swift and brutal. She had watched the broadcast from her apartment, the champagne glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor as Eleanor delivered the killing blow. Her carefully constructed revenge had backfired spectacularly. She was not the secret winner. She was the villain in a global drama. Hounded by paparazzi and reviled by an online mob that dissected her every move, her life became an inescapable prison. The details of the adoption fraud led to a formal investigation. She lost the high-paying consulting job she'd secured and found herself unemployable. Her name, toxic. She had wanted to steal a legacy but ended up destroying her own future, vanishing into a bitter obscurity, haunted by the infamy she had so carefully engineered. Eleanor, however, did not revel in their destruction. Her focus was singular, her son. True to her word, her lawyer filed for divorce the next morning. The legal battle was short and decisive. Armed with the mountain of evidence and overwhelming public support, Eleanor's team secured a settlement that was not just financially massive, but strategically brilliant. She took control of a significant portion of the liquid assets, ensuring her and her son's independence forever. It was never about the money itself, but what it represented: freedom, security, and the power to build a life on her own terms. She sold the cold, cavernous penthouse with its painful memories and bought a magnificent, sun-drenched brownstone in Brooklyn's Park Slope. It was a home with character and history, with a sprawling garden that felt like a secret world in the heart of the city. Here, away from the prying eyes of Manhattan society, she began to heal. A few weeks after the dust settled, she hosted a small, intensely private ceremony in her new garden. Her closest friends gathered under the shade of an old maple tree. There was no priest or officiant, only Eleanor holding her son, who was wrapped in a simple white blanket. "A name is the first gift we give a child," she began, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the quiet garden. "It is a promise, a story, a destiny. The name we first chose for him was a story of two families, a bridge between two worlds. But that bridge has burned. The story has changed. She looked down at her son, his eyes open and watching her with serene curiosity. He will not carry the weight of his father's mistakes. He will not be a reminder of betrayal. His story will not begin with ashes. It will begin from the ashes. She took a deep breath, her smile radiant and genuine. I name you Phoenix Arthur Vance. Phoenix for the mythical bird that is reborn from fire, stronger and more beautiful than before. And Arthur, for my grandfather, a man of unwavering integrity and quiet strength, whose legacy is one of love and honor. Your name is a promise, my love, she whispered, kissing his forehead. A promise of resilience, of truth, and of a life that will be entirely, magnificently your own. Phoenix. It was more than a name. It was a declaration, a testament to his mother's spirit, to her ability to turn the deepest wounds into sources of incredible strength. In that garden, surrounded by love, Eleanor Vance hadn't just given her son a new name. She had forged him a new destiny, one built not on a broken dynasty, but on the unbreakable foundation of a mother's love and the triumphant power of rebirth. In the end, Eleanor Vance didn't just expose a mistress. She dismantled an empire built on deceit and reclaimed her own power. She proved that a stolen name could be replaced by a stronger one, and that out of the ashes of betrayal, a new life can rise. Her story became a viral sensation, a testament to the fact that hell hath no fury, like a mother protecting her child's legacy. What would you have done in Eleanor's shoes? Would you have walked away quietly, or would you have sought your own public justice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The whisper of silk, the glint of a diamond, the sweet scent of impending fatherhood. Amelia had orchestrated the perfect surprise. A gift not just of luxury, but of love sent to her husband's gleaming corporate office. It was a testament to their shared future, a future she carried gently within her. But in the sterile air of that high-rise, another woman's hands adorned with rings he'd also bought would tear open the carefully wrapped package. The scream that followed wasn't one of delight. It was a sound that would shatter the pristine facade of their perfect life, exposing a web of deceit so intricate that the truth would be the most devastating blow of all. Amelia traced the rim of her porcelain teacup, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her. From the 35th floor of their penthouse apartment, the city sprawled beneath her like a glittering tapestry, a world she and Julian had conquered together. Or rather, a world Julian had conquered and she had graciously adorned. Her reflection in the panoramic window showed a woman who had everything a husband whose name echoed in the halls of finance, a home that graced the covers of architectural magazines, and a baby, their baby nestled safely in her womb. She was 6 months along the gentle swell of her stomach, a constant, wondrous reminder of the new life she was nurturing. This pregnancy, a hard-won miracle after years of quiet heartbreak, had cemented what she believed to be an unbreakable bond with Julian. He had been ecstatic, his usual cool demeanor melting away to reveal a man of surprising tenderness. He'd ordered a custom-built crib from a bespoke furniture maker in Italy, filled a room with every conceivable baby gadget, and massaged her swollen ankles every night with a devotion that brought tears to her eyes. Julian was a man of grand gestures. Their life was a testament to it. Their wedding had been a week-long affair on the Amalfi Coast. Her birthdays were marked by surprise trips to Paris or the acquisition of a rare piece of art. He'd once bought out an entire Michelin-starred restaurant for a private dinner, simply because she'd mentioned a craving for their truffle pasta. He called her his queen, his everything. And Amelia, swept away by the sheer force of his affection and the dazzling world he provided, had believed it. Every single word. Today was the anniversary of the day they'd first met. A detail she was sure Julian, in his whirlwind of meetings and multi-million-dollar deals, had forgotten. But Amelia hadn't. She cherished these small, intimate milestones. They were the invisible threads that wove their grand love story together. To commemorate it, she had planned a surprise that was both deeply personal and a nod to the life he so meticulously curated. She had commissioned a one-of-a-kind timepiece, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, with a secret inscription on the back. It wasn't a flamboyant, diamond-encrusted model. It was classic, elegant, timeless. Everything she felt their love was. The inscription was a line from a poem they'd both loved in college, a poignant reminder of their humbler beginnings before the towering skyscrapers and private jets. My soul, your soul, 2 stars in the same sky. But the watch was only part of the gift. Tucked inside the luxurious lacquered box was a small silver-plated frame. Inside it wasn't a photo of them, but the first sonogram picture of their baby, the tiny, grainy image that had made Julian weep with joy. And beside it, a handwritten note on her thick, cream-colored stationery. My dearest Julian, remember the starry nights on that rusty fire escape, dreaming of a future we could barely imagine today on the anniversary of our first hello. I wanted to give you something to remind you that even in our dazzling sky, some stars shine just for us. This little one is our newest star. I love you more than words can say. Happy anniversary. Forever yours, Amelia. She smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. It was perfect. She had arranged for a premium courier service, the kind that handled priceless art and sensitive tournaments, to deliver it to his office at precisely 3 p.m. She imagined his surprise, his colleagues catching a glimpse of the devoted family man behind the ruthless CEO. She pictured him calling her, his voice thick with emotion, thanking her for remembering, for loving him so completely. The courier, a man in a crisp uniform, arrived exactly on time. He handled the elegantly wrapped package with the reverence it deserved. Amelia gave him the address. Sterling Whitcroft Holdings, 48th floor, 1 Vanderbilt, Manhattan. The name of the building itself was a symbol of power and prestige, a fitting stage for her grand romantic gesture. Please ensure this is handed directly to Mr. Julian Croft, she instructed, pressing a generous tip into the courier's hand. It's of immense personal value. Of course, Mrs. Croft. It will be delivered with the utmost care. As the door clicked shut, a wave of contentment washed over her. She settled onto the plush velvet sofa, picking up a book on motherhood. The afternoon sun streamed in, casting a warm glow on the pages. For the next hour, she was lost in a world of feeding schedules and developmental milestones, her heart full of a quiet, unshakable joy. She was Amelia Croft, the cherished wife of a brilliant man, soon to be the mother of his child. Her world was perfect, secure, and shimmering with love. The scream that would tear it all apart was still hours away, an impossible sound in a life so meticulously soundproofed from reality. Julian's office was an extension of his personality, sleek, modern, and intimidating. Glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, but the real power was inside the room. A massive mahogany desk, an array of monitors displaying fluctuating market data, and a collection of abstract art that was both expensive and emotionally distant. It was a space designed to communicate dominance. His executive assistant, a woman in her late 50s, with a stern but efficient demeanor, guarded the entrance to this inner sanctum like a hawk. She vetted his calls, managed his impossible schedule, and could spot a sycophant from a mile away. Her name was Margaret, and she was fiercely loyal to Julian. She was also, Amelia knew, fond of her. Margaret often commented on how Amelia was a calming influence on her demanding boss. When the courier arrived at the 48th floor, it was Margaret he met. "A package for Mr. Julian Croft," the courier announced, presenting the beautifully wrapped box. "Personal delivery." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. It wasn't unusual for gifts to arrive, but this had a different feel. It was elegant, personal, not the usual ostentatious corporate gift basket. She recognized the expensive wrapping paper, the same kind Amelia had used for Julian's last birthday gift. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "Thank you. I'll see that he gets it," she said, signing the electronic pad. She carried the gift towards Julian's office, her heels clicking softly on the polished marble floor. The glass door was slightly ajar, and she could hear voices from within. Julian's deep, confident tone and a lighter, feminine laugh that was decidedly not Amelia's. Margaret paused. This was the delicate part of her job, the part she hated, the part where she had to navigate the other side of Julian Croft's life, the side that Amelia in her gilded cage knew nothing about. The laugh belonged to Cassandra. Cassandra was a senior analyst in the mergers and acquisitions department. She was whip-smart, ambitious, and stunningly beautiful in a way that was the polar opposite of Amelia's classic elegance. Where Amelia was soft curves and gentle smiles, Cassandra was sharp angles and a predatory gaze. She had raven black hair, cut in a severe, stylish bob, and a wardrobe of form-fitting dresses that were just on the edge of office-appropriate. She was a shark in a sea of sharks, and she had set her sights on Julian Croft from the day she'd walked into the firm. Margaret had seen it all unfold. The late-night strategy sessions, the business trips that coincidentally involved a layover in a romantic city, the lingering touches and shared glances that crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with stock prices. She despised Cassandra, not just for the blatant affair, but for the danger she posed to the kind, unsuspecting woman who was carrying Julian's child. She could hear their conversation more clearly now. "The deal is sealed. We'll announce the acquisition on Monday," Julian was saying. "We should celebrate." Cassandra purred, her voice dripping with suggestion. "My place tonight. I'll open that bottle of single malt you like." "I can't tonight, Cass. Amelia is—" He trailed off, but Margaret could fill in the blank. "Amelia is pregnant. Amelia is waiting for me at home." "Right." The little wifey Cassandra's tone was laced with a derision she barely tried to conceal. "How is she, by the way?" Still enjoying her life as a professional lunchgoer, Margaret's hand tightened on the package. The insult to Amelia was a physical blow. She despised this woman's cruelty. "Be nice." Julian's voice was firm, but it lacked real conviction. He never defended Amelia with the ferocity he used to defend a business deal. "I'm just saying," Cassandra continued, undeterred. "You're here closing the biggest deal of the year, a titan of the industry, and she's at home." "What, picking out nursery colors?" "It's a bit of a mismatch, don't you think?" Before Julian could respond, Margaret decided to make her presence known. She knocked sharply on the doorframe. "Julian. A personal delivery for you." Julian looked up, his expression shifting from one of intimate conspiracy to professional command in a split second. Cassandra, however, didn't bother to school her features. She shot Margaret a look of pure annoyance, angry at the interruption. "Bring it in." "Margaret," Julian said, gesturing towards his desk. As Margaret walked in, Cassandra's eyes landed on the gift. Her expression changed from annoyance to a covetous curiosity. It was clearly expensive, clearly personal, and in Cassandra's mind, anything personal and expensive belonging to Julian should by rights be related to her. "Ooh, what's this?" "An admirer?" she asked, stepping forward. She ran a perfectly manicured finger over the silk ribbon. "Let me guess. A gift from the board for closing the Henderson deal." "It's from my wife, Julian," said a little too quickly. He made a move to take the box, but Cassandra was faster. With a playful, possessive flick of her wrist, she snatched it from Margaret's grasp. From Amelia. Cassandra's red lips curled into a smirk. How sweet. What did she get? Another set of monogrammed handkerchiefs. "Cassandra, give it to me." Julian's voice held a warning tone. This was a line he wasn't prepared to cross in front of his assistant. But Cassandra was fueled by arrogance and a desire to needle him, to assert her place in his life. She saw herself not as the mistress, but as his true partner, the one who understood his world of power and ambition. Amelia was just a domestic accessory. "Oh, don't be such a spoil sport." "Darling," she cooed, her voice loud enough for anyone passing in the hallway to hear. "I want to see what perfect taste your perfect wife has. Let's open it together." And with that, before Julian or Margaret could react, Cassandra's sharp, blood-red nails tore into the elegant wrapping paper. She ripped it open with a careless, almost violent motion, a stark contrast to the love and care with which Amelia had wrapped it just hours before. The lid of the Patek Philippe box was revealed. Cassandra's eyes widened with genuine surprise and a flash of greed. "Well, well, Mrs. Croft has expensive taste," she murmured, lifting the heavy lid. The classic, understated beauty of the Calatrava gleamed up at them. For a moment there was silence. Julian stared, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Margaret held her breath, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. And then Cassandra saw what was nestled beside the watch. She picked up the small silver frame. She tilted it towards the light. Her brow furrowed in confusion. And then she saw it, the grainy black-and-white image. The unmistakable shape of a fetus, her face a mask of triumphant arrogance, just seconds before contorted. The color drained from her cheeks, her crimson lips parted. And then she screamed. It wasn't a scream of surprise or delight. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated shock and horror. A sound of a carefully constructed reality, shattering into a million pieces. A sound that echoed through the glass-walled office out into the hushed professional quiet of the 48th floor. A primal cry of a secret blown wide open. The scream ripped through the sterile air of the 48th floor, sharp and visceral. It was a sound that didn't belong amidst the quiet hum of servers and the muted ringing of phones. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. The low murmur of business chatter ceased. In that one piercing moment, every eye on the floor was turned towards the glass-walled office of Julian Croft. Inside the scene was frozen. Julian stood, his face a ghastly shade of pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and panic. Margaret was rooted to the spot, her professional composure finally cracking as she stared at the unfolding disaster, and Cassandra was trembling. Her hand clapped over her mouth, as if to shove the scream back down her throat. Her other hand still held the silver frame, but her knuckles were white, her grip so tight it threatened to crush the delicate object. "What? What is this?" she finally whispered, her voice a ragged, broken thing. She thrust the sonogram picture towards Julian, her eyes wild and accusing. "What is this?" "Julian!" Julian finally jolted into action, lunged forward and snatched the frame from her hand. He grabbed the watchbox, shoving the picture and the handwritten note back inside with clumsy, frantic movements. "Get out!" he hissed at Cassandra, his voice low and venomous. "Get out now!" But Cassandra wasn't listening. Her gaze was locked on his face, searching for an answer, a denial, anything. You told me you were leaving her. You said the marriage was just for appearances, a business arrangement." Her voice began to rise again, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "You don't have a baby with a business arrangement, Julian." I said. "Get out!" He roared, his voice finally exploding, echoing his earlier command, but now filled with raw, desperate anger. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh, and began to physically propel her towards the door. "Let go of me," she shrieked, struggling against his grip. "You lied to me. All this time you've been lying to me." The spectacle was now on full display for the entire senior management floor. Colleagues, rivals, and subordinates alike were staring their faces a mixture of shock, fascination, and thinly veiled schadenfreude. The pristine facade of Julian Croft, the untouchable master of the universe, was cracking right before their eyes. Margaret, her training kicking in, moved swiftly to the door. "Everything is fine," she announced in a firm, commanding voice to the gawking crowd. "Mr. Croft is handling a private matter. Please return to your work." She pulled the door shut, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the charged silence. She then turned back to the chaos within. Julian had managed to shove Cassandra out of his office, slamming the door behind her. He leaned against it, his chest heaving, his tie askew. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time Margaret had ever seen. He looked cornered, trapped. Through the glass wall they could see Cassandra stumbling back to her own desk, a trail of stunned and whispering colleagues in her wake. She collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent sobs. The damage was done. The secret was out. The carefully compartmentalized worlds of Julian Croft had just collided with the force of a nuclear explosion. Julian turned his eyes, finally landing on Margaret. His expression was one of pure fury, but it was the desperate fury of a man who has lost control. Not a word of this to anyone, Margaret, he seethed, especially not to Amelia. "Do you understand me?" Margaret met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. For years, she had been his loyal soldier, his gatekeeper, the silent facilitator of his double life. She had rationalized it as part of the job, a necessary evil in the high-stakes world they inhabited. But the sound of Cassandra's scream, the sight of that tiny sonogram picture, had shifted something within her. It was no longer an abstract indiscretion. It was a betrayal of a woman she respected, a woman who was blissfully awaiting the birth of her child. "She is going to call Julian." "Margaret," said her voice, steady and cool. "She is expecting you to thank her for your gift. What are you going to say?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Julian stared at the Patek Philippe box on his desk as if it were a venomous snake. The gift, meant to be a symbol of love and shared history, had become an instrument of his exposure. Amelia's perfect, heartfelt gesture had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He snatched the box, opened it, and pulled out the handwritten note. He read Amelia's loving words, her reference to their shared past, her excitement for their future. His face, already pale, seemed to lose another shade of color. The sincerity of her love, the purity of her intentions, was a searing indictment of his own duplicity. "I'll handle it," he muttered, shoving the note into his pocket. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over Amelia's contact photo. A picture of her smiling, radiant on a beach in the Maldives. He looked like a man about to walk to his own execution. Meanwhile, back in her sun-drenched penthouse, Amelia was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. It was now well past 4 p.m. She had expected a call from Julian almost immediately. He was usually so prompt, so effusive in his gratitude for her gifts. She pictured the scene in his office again, but this time a small, unwelcome detail crept in the press of his schedule, an important meeting he couldn't leave, a sudden market crisis demanding his attention. She reassured herself. He was a busy man. That was part of the package. He would call when he could. She tried to go back to her book, but the words blurred on the page. She checked her phone. No missed calls. No messages. She decided to call him. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "You've reached Julian Croft. I'm unavailable at the moment. Please leave a message." This was unusual. Julian prided himself on his accessibility, at least to her. His phone was an extension of his hand. For him not to answer was strange. For him not to have called her by now was almost unheard of. A tiny seed of anxiety began to sprout in the fertile ground of her waiting. She told herself she was being silly, that the pregnancy hormones were making her oversensitive. She made herself another cup of herbal tea, the steam warming her hands, but not the chill that was beginning to creep into her heart. Back on the 48th floor, Julian was staring at his phone, watching Amelia's call go to voicemail. He couldn't talk to her. Not now. Not when the sound of Cassandra's scream was still ringing in his ears. What would he say? How could he possibly feign the delight and emotion she would be expecting? His voice would betray him. His guilt was a physical thing, a sour taste in his mouth. He looked at the gift box. He had to hide it. He couldn't take it home. Amelia would expect to see him wearing the watch. She would ask where he had put the picture frame. The entire gift was now radioactive, a piece of evidence in a crime he was desperate to conceal. He looked at Margaret, his eyes pleading. "I need you to what, Julian?" She cut him off, her tone sharp. "To lie for you, to clean up this mess. My job is to manage your schedule, not your infidelities." The insubordination was shocking, and they both knew it. But Margaret had reached her limit. Julian's face hardened. "You will do what I tell you to do, Margaret. Your loyalty is to me and to this company. Your very generous salary depends on it." The threat hung in the air, ugly and undisguised. Margaret stared back at him, a silent battle of wills playing out between them. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years of complicity, she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice flat and devoid of its usual warmth. "Take this," he said, pushing the Patek Philippe box towards her. "Get it out of here. I don't care what you do with it. Sell it. Throw it in the Hudson River. Just make sure it disappears. And it never ever gets back to my wife." He then turned his attention to the more immediate problem, Cassandra. He strode out of his office, ignoring the renewed whispers and stares, and marched directly to her desk. My office. Now, he commanded. Cassandra, her face tear-streaked and blotchy, looked up at him with a mixture of hatred and heartbreak. She followed him back to his office, and he shut the door firmly behind them. "You have 5 minutes to pack your personal belongings," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "Security will escort you from the building. Your severance package will be generous, but it is contingent on you signing a non-disclosure agreement, so comprehensive it will prevent you from even thinking my name." "Is that clear?" Cassandra stared at him aghast. "You're firing me." Her voice was a choked whisper. "After everything. After all your promises." "The promises were based on a discretion you have just proven incapable of," Julian retorted icily. "You created a scene. You disrupted the entire floor. You are a liability. The situation is over. You are over." The cruelty was breathtaking. The man who had whispered promises of a future together was now discarding her like a failed business venture. Cassandra's heartbreak curdled into a cold, hard rage. "You think you can just get rid of me," she hissed. "You think you can silence me with money. You have no idea who you're messing with, Julian. I know everything. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the Cayman deal. I know where all the bodies are buried. You may have fired me from your company, but you are not rid of me." She turned and walked out of his office, her head held high, leaving a stunned Julian in her wake. He had solved one problem by firing her, but he had just created a much, much bigger one. He had underestimated Cassandra's fury, and he had no idea just how far she would go to get her revenge. And miles away in the quiet luxury of her penthouse, Amelia looked at the clock. It was almost 5 p.m. The silence from her husband was no longer just strange. It was a screaming, gaping void that was starting to swallow her perfect world whole. She picked up her phone and dialed a different number. It was a number she rarely used, but one she knew by heart. It was Margaret's direct line at the office. "Margaret." "It's Amelia Croft," she said, trying to keep her voice light and casual. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I've been trying to reach Julian. Is he in a meeting? I sent a package over earlier, and I just wanted to make sure he received it." On the other end of the line, Margaret closed her eyes. She held the heavy Patek Philippe box in her lap. The lie Julian wanted her to tell felt like poison on her tongue. But the threat to her livelihood, the years of ingrained loyalty, and a flicker of misguided pity for the man whose life was imploding, made her hesitate. "Yes, Mrs. Croft." Margaret began, her voice carefully neutral. "He's just been pulled into an emergency conference call with the London office. The market is very volatile today. He did ask me to tell you that he received your gift and he loves it. He said he would call you the second he is free." The lie was delivered, the first of many, and as Amelia hung up, a wave of relief washed over her, chasing away the earlier anxiety. Of course, a market crisis. It all made sense. She was being silly, oversensitive. Her Julian was just busy conquering the world. He loved her gift. Everything was fine. But Margaret, as she placed the phone back in its cradle, felt a profound sense of shame. She looked at the expensive box in her lap, the symbol of a pure love that had been so cruelly desecrated. She thought of the furious, vengeful woman who had just been fired and the kind, pregnant woman who had just been lied to. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this was far from over. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception. Julian returned home that evening, the very picture of the doting husband. He came bearing a bouquet of Amelia's favorite peonies, and a story expertly crafted of a frantic day-long crisis involving a sudden currency devaluation that had threatened a major European acquisition. "I'm so sorry, my love," he said, enveloping her in a hug. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, his lips carefully avoiding hers. "I was chained to my desk all day." "Margaret told you I got your gift." Amelia melted into his embrace, her earlier anxieties seeming foolish and distant. "She did. I'm just glad everything is okay." "Did you like it?" she asked, her eyes searching his for the emotional response she had been anticipating all day. Julian's performance was flawless. He smiled a warm, crinkling smile that almost reached his eyes. "Liked it, Amelia?" I was speechless. "It's magnificent. The Calatrava, it's a work of art, and the inscription, it took me right back to that fire escape." He paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But the picture, that was the real gift. I almost lost it right there in front of the entire board. It was exactly what she had wanted to hear, the perfect reaction. Yet a tiny, almost imperceptible detail felt off." He spoke the words with practiced ease, but the genuine, soul-shaking emotion she had expected to see in his eyes wasn't quite there. It was like watching a brilliant actor play a part rather than witnessing a true, heartfelt reaction. But she dismissed the feeling as quickly as it came. He was tired. It had been a long, stressful day. "Where is it?" she asked, a playful smile on her face. "I expected you to come home wearing it." Julian didn't miss a beat. "Are you crazy?" A Patek Philippe. That beautiful. I took one look at it and locked it straight in the office safe. It's far too valuable to be worn every day, and especially not on a day as chaotic as today. I'd be terrified of scratching it. We'll take it out for our anniversary dinner on Saturday. It was a plausible, even sensible explanation. It was so Julian, protective of beautiful, expensive things. And so Amelia accepted it. She accepted his excuses, his carefully constructed narrative, the slight distance in his kiss. She wanted to believe him. Her entire world, the very foundation of her happiness, depended on it. Life returned to its glossy, perfect rhythm. Julian went to the office, Amelia attended her prenatal yoga classes, and oversaw the final touches on the nursery. They talked about baby names, debated the merits of different strollers, and planned a baby moon in the Seychelles. Julian was attentive, charming, and affectionate, but Amelia couldn't shake a subtle, persistent feeling of unease. It was in the small things. He started keeping his phone face down on the nightstand, something he'd never done before. He was more jumpy, a sudden noise making him flinch. He claimed it was the residual stress from the market crisis, but there was a furtive, hunted look in his eyes that she'd never seen before. He also began to work later, claiming the European acquisition required late-night calls and endless paperwork. He would come home long after she had gone to bed, slipping under the covers, with the cool silence of a ghost. A week after the incident, Amelia had a doctor's appointment. It was a routine checkup, and she'd asked Julian to come with her, hoping they could hear the baby's heartbeat together again. He had agreed enthusiastically, but on the morning of the appointment, he called, his voice strained. "Darling, I'm so sorry. I'm completely swamped. We're in the final stages of due diligence on the Henderson deal. I can't possibly get away." "The Henderson deal?" Amelia asked, confused. "I thought that was the deal that closed last week, the one that caused the big crisis." There was a fractional pause on the other end of the line. No. That was the precursor. This is the final, painstaking legal work. It's incredibly tedious. I promise I'll be at the next one. Get me a new picture of our little star. Okay? She hung up, a knot of disappointment tightening in her chest. She went to the appointment alone, sitting in the waiting room, surrounded by beaming couples. She listened to the strong, rhythmic thump of her baby's heart, a sound of profound joy that was now tinged with a lonely sadness. That afternoon, needing a distraction, she decided to do some shopping. As she browsed in a high-end baby boutique, her phone buzzed. It was an email notification. The subject line was blank. The sender was an address she didn't recognize, Karma. RSA bitch at protonmail.com. Curiosity piqued, she opened it. There was no text, just a single attachment, a video file. Hesitantly, she tapped to download it. It was short, only about 15 seconds long, and the quality was grainy, clearly filmed on a phone from a distance. The video showed a man and a woman standing outside a sleek, modern apartment building at night. They were arguing. The man was Julian. The woman was beautiful with striking dark hair and a furious expression. Amelia's heart began to pound in her chest. She recognized the woman. She had seen her once or twice at company functions. Cassandra, an analyst from his firm. The audio was faint, but Amelia turned the volume all the way up, pressing the phone to her ear. "Can't just throw me away." Cassandra's voice was high and shrill. "The deal is done, Cassandra. It's over." Julian's voice was cold, dismissive. "Is it? Or are you just scared? Scared your perfect little wife will find out. Her perfect little life is a complete and utter lie." The video ended. Amelia stood frozen in the middle of the baby boutique, surrounded by soft pastels and cheerful animal motifs. The air left her lungs. A cold, terrifying dread, far worse than any anxiety she had felt before, washed over her. A lie. Her perfect life is a complete and utter lie. Her hands shaking, she stumbled out of the store, nearly colliding with another shopper. She hailed a taxi, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. An argument. It could be work-related. Cassandra had just been fired. Julian had told her for poor performance and a bad attitude. Maybe this was just the fallout from that. But Cassandra's words. "Scared your perfect little wife will find out." The words echoed in her head, a venomous chorus. No, it wasn't possible. Julian loved her. He was the father of her child. They were building a life together. This woman, this Cassandra, was just a bitter, disgruntled ex-employee trying to cause trouble. That had to be it. But the seed of doubt once planted had taken root, and it was growing its thorny vines wrapping around her heart. When she got home, the penthouse felt different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, a beautifully decorated set for a play in which she was the unknowing lead. She walked into Julian's home office, a space she rarely entered. It was as immaculate as ever. She ran her hand over his desk, her eyes scanning for, she didn't even know what. Her gaze fell upon his briefcase, which he had left by his chair. On a sudden, uncharacteristic impulse, she opened it. Inside were files, a laptop, a leather-bound notebook. She picked up the notebook. His handwriting, a sharp, decisive script, filled the pages. It was mostly meeting notes, market analysis numbers. And then she saw it. Tucked into a side pocket of the notebook was a receipt. A jewelry receipt dated 2 months ago. It was from Cartier. The item purchased a Trinity ring. Amelia's breath caught. The Trinity ring. 3 interlocking bands of gold, a symbol of love, fidelity, and friendship. It was a beautiful, romantic piece, and Julian had not given it to her. Her mind flashed back to the video, to Cassandra's hands gesturing angrily. She remembered seeing the glint of gold on her finger. 3 interlocking bands. The blood drained from Amelia's face. She sank into Julian's leather office chair, the receipt trembling in her hand. This wasn't a disgruntled employee. This was his mistress. The late nights, the business trips, the sudden distance. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The lie wasn't just in the video. The lie was her entire life. And then a worse thought, a thought so monstrous it made her feel physically ill. The gift. The Patek Philippe. The sonogram. The story about the office safe suddenly seemed laughably thin. The praise for the gift felt hollow, rehearsed. Why had he really hidden it? What had really happened that day? The pieces began to form a horrifying mosaic in her mind. The scream that Cassandra had let out in the video. It was a scream of shock. What if she hadn't been screaming at Julian in the street? What if she had screamed in his office? Amelia's mind raced back to the day she sent the gift. Her call to Margaret. Margaret's smooth, reassuring lie. He's in a conference call. He loves the gift. Margaret. Margaret would know. She was Julian's gatekeeper. She saw everything, heard everything. And despite her professional demeanor, Amelia had always felt a current of warmth from the older woman, a hint of sympathy. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed. Amelia stood up. The hurt, the betrayal. It was a physical weight threatening to crush her. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A cold, hard anger. She had been played for a fool. Her love, her pregnancy, her most sacred feelings had been used as props in his sordid drama. She would not be a victim. She would find out the truth. The whole truth. She picked up her phone and dialed Margaret's number again. This time there would be no polite inquiries. This time there would be no accepting easy lies. "Margaret," she said, when the assistant answered her voice dangerously quiet. "We need to talk. Not on the phone. In person. I'm coming to the office now." Before Margaret could protest, Amelia hung up. She walked into her bedroom, her movements stiff and robotic. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. The soft, happy woman from a week ago was gone. In her place was a woman with haunted eyes and a grim, determined set to her mouth. She was a queen, just as Julian had always said, but a queen whose kingdom had been revealed to be built on lies, and she was about to go to war. The taxi ride to 1 Vanderbilt was a blur. The familiar Manhattan cityscape, once a symbol of her and Julian's shared success, now seemed hostile and alien. Every gleaming skyscraper felt like a monument to a lie. Amelia sat ramrod straight, her hands clasped tightly over her baby bump, a protective primal gesture. The naive, trusting woman, who had so lovingly sent a gift to her husband, was gone, incinerated in the fire of his betrayal. In her place was a woman, forged in cold fury, her mind whirring with a chilling clarity. She didn't go to the main entrance. She knew the protocol, the way visitors were announced, the chance that Julian would be alerted to her presence. Instead, she remembered a private entrance on the side street that led to a discreet elevator bank sold by the top executives. Margaret had pointed it out to her once. It was a small detail, a piece of insider knowledge, and she would use it. She was done playing by the rules of a game that had been rigged against her from the start. When she stepped out onto the 48th floor, the atmosphere was thick with a tension she could now finally understand. The whispers she might have once dismissed as office gossip now sounded like echoes of her own humiliation. She saw the sideways glances, the sudden silences as she walked past. They knew. They had all known. They had watched the drama unfold while she sat in her penthouse, blissfully ignorant. She walked directly to Margaret's desk, her gaze unwavering. The older woman looked up, her face pale. She saw the look in Amelia's eyes, and her professional mask crumbled. What she saw was not the gentle Mrs. Croft, but a woman on the verge of shattering, held together only by sheer force of will. Mrs. Croft. Amelia, you shouldn't be here, Margaret stammered, standing up. Don't, Amelia, said her voice low and steady, cutting through Margaret's flustered greeting. Don't you dare lie to me again. Margaret, I know. I know about Cassandra. I know about the affair. Margaret's face fell. The years of carefully maintained composure dissolved into undisguised pity and regret. How she whispered. That doesn't matter, Amelia said, her voice sharp. What matters is what happened here last week. The day I sent the gift, I want you to tell me everything, every single detail. And if you value your conscience, you will not leave a single thing out. Julian was in a meeting in the main boardroom, a glass-walled enclosure in the center of the floor. He was visible to them, pacing, gesturing, commanding the room, completely unaware of the reckoning that was taking place just 50 feet away. Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting nervously towards Julian's office. Her loyalty, her job, her entire life was tied to that man. But then she looked back at Amelia. She saw the profound pain in her eyes, the slight tremble of her hands resting on her pregnant stomach. She thought of the beautiful, heartfelt gift and the ugly, violent way it had been desecrated. The lie she had told Amelia over the phone had been eating at her for a week. The guilt was a heavy, indigestible stone in her gut. He made me get rid of it, Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. Amelia's blood ran cold. Get rid of what? The gift. The watch. The picture of your baby. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Cassandra was in his office when it arrived. She thought it was for her. She opened it, and she saw the sonogram. She screamed. The whole floor heard it. It was a disaster. The scene played out in Amelia's mind, a horrifying, vivid nightmare. The woman who was sleeping with her husband, her hands on the picture of their unborn child. The scream, the humiliation. It was infinitely worse than anything she could have imagined. And Julian. Amelia pressed her voice devoid of emotion. What did he do? He fired her. Right on the spot. Then he gave me the box and told me to make it disappear. He was terrified you would find out. Where is it now? Amelia's question was like a shard of ice. Margaret swallowed hard. She reached down into the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet, a drawer she had kept locked all week. She pulled out the Patek Philippe box and placed it on the desk between them. Amelia stared at it. The elegant wrapping paper was gone, replaced by the stark lacquered wood. It looked like a tiny coffin. With trembling fingers, she opened the lid. The magnificent watch was there, gleaming cold and unused. Beside it, tucked away, was the silver frame with the sonogram and her handwritten note. She picked up the note. My soul, your soul. 2 stars in the same sky. The words, once a declaration of transcendent love, were now a bitter, mocking epitaph. A tear, hot and heavy, finally escaped her, and splashed onto the expensive cream stationery, blurring the ink. She wiped the tear away with an angry gesture. This was not the time for weeping. This was the time for action. "Thank you, Margaret," she said, her voice regaining its strength. She closed the box. "You've done the right thing." She looked over at the glass boardroom. Julian's meeting was wrapping up. People were starting to stand, shaking hands. He would be out in minutes. Margaret Amelia said, a new chilling plan forming in her mind. "Does this company have a town hall meeting scheduled any time soon?" An all-hands meeting for the entire New York office. Margaret looked confused. "Yes, there's one this Friday. Julian is the keynote speaker. It's a big quarterly address." "Perfect," Amelia said. She gave Margaret a look of such intense, cold resolve that the older woman physically recoiled. "I want you to do one more thing for me. And this time, it's not for Julian. It's for me. And for every woman who has ever been made to feel like a fool." 2 days later on Friday, the auditorium at Sterling Whitcroft Holdings was packed. Hundreds of employees, from fresh-faced interns to seasoned senior partners, filled the tiered seats. There was a buzz of anticipation in the air. The quarterly town hall was a major event, a chance to hear directly from the CEO. But today, the anticipation was laced with something else, gossip. The story of Cassandra's dramatic screaming exit and swift dismissal had spread like wildfire. Everyone knew something had happened, but the details were murky speculative. Julian Croft stood at the podium on the brightly lit stage, looking every inch the powerful, confident leader. He was dressed in a bespoke suit, his voice resonant and assured as he spoke about quarterly earnings, market projections, and the company's bright future. He was in his element, the master of his universe. The chaos of the previous week firmly behind him. He had dealt with Cassandra. He had placated Amelia. The storm had passed. He was just moving into his closing remarks, a rallying cry about integrity and teamwork, when the main doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. A figure was silhouetted in the doorway. It was a woman. As she walked down the central aisle, a stunned silence fell over the room. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as people recognized her. It was Amelia Croft. She looked radiant, ethereal. She was wearing a simple but elegant white dress that accentuated her pregnancy. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked like an angel, an avenging angel. Julian stopped mid-sentence, his words dying in his throat. His face went ashen. He stared at her, his confident posture collapsing, a look of pure, unadulterated terror in his eyes. He knew in that instant that his world was about to end. Amelia didn't look at him. She walked calmly and deliberately towards the stage, her heels clicking with a steady, resolute rhythm on the floor. In her hands, she carried the Patek Philippe box. As she reached the short set of stairs leading to the stage, a few security guards started to move towards her, unsure of how to react. But Amelia simply gave them a serene, dismissive glance, and they stopped confused. She walked onto the stage and approached the podium, stopping directly in front of her husband. She could feel the collective gaze of hundreds of people on her, could hear the frantic whispering. She ignored it all. Her focus was entirely on Julian. She leaned into the microphone, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous room. "My husband," she began, her voice ringing with a strength no one in that room had ever heard from her, "is a man who speaks about integrity, about loyalty, about the values that make this company great." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Julian was frozen, paralyzed, a statue of a guilty man. He is also a man of grand gestures, she continued, her voice gaining an edge. And recently, to celebrate a personal milestone, the anniversary of the day we met, I decided to make a grand gesture of my own. She held up the lacquered box for the entire auditorium to see. The giant screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying stock charts, now showed a close-up of her face, her expression one of heartbreaking composure. "I bought him this," she said, her voice starting to tremble, but with rage, not weakness. "A Patek Philippe watch, a symbol of timeless love." But that wasn't the real gift. She opened the box and took out the small silver frame. She held it up. The camera zoomed in, and the grainy image of the sonogram filled the screens. A collective gasp went through the audience. This was the real gift, she said, her voice breaking for a moment. "Our baby, our future." I sent it to his office, hoping to surprise him to share a moment of joy. She turned her gaze fully on Julian, her eyes locking with his. All the love she had ever felt for him was gone, replaced by a contempt so profound it was like a physical force. But I was not the only one who saw it. My husband's mistress, Cassandra Miller, a senior analyst he was sleeping with for over a year, opened it first. She saw the picture of my baby, the baby of the man who had promised to leave his wife for her, and she screamed. The auditorium erupted. The whispers turned into a roar of shock and scandal. This was better, more salacious than any rumor. This was a confession, a public crucifixion. He lied to me. Amelia's voice soared over the din filled with righteous fury. He fired his mistress to silence her. He took this beautiful gift, this symbol of our family, and he ordered it to be destroyed, to be hidden, so he could continue to live his lie. He stood in our home, looked me in the eye, and told me he loved it while secretly trying to erase its existence. She placed the sonogram picture on the podium, directly in front of Julian. Then she picked up the watch, the magnificent, priceless Patek Philippe Calatrava. "My husband values beautiful, expensive things," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "He builds his life around them. He acquires them. He controls them. Women companies' watches. It's all the same to him." And then, in a move that no one could have predicted, she drew back her arm, and with all her strength, she threw the Patek Philippe watch across the stage. It hit the far wall with a sickening crack and clattered to the floor. Its delicate mechanism shattered its timeless beauty, destroyed in an instant. The sound echoed through the silent, stunned auditorium. Amelia turned back to the microphone, her face a mask of triumphant, heartbreaking resolve. "The assets of this man, of this company, may be vast," she declared, her voice ringing with the authority of a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. "But his integrity is bankrupt. His loyalty is worthless. And as for my assets, the shares in this company that I own in my own name, a very significant portion, I believe, they will be on the market by the end of the day. I believe the term is a hostile takeover. I'm sure you all, as experts in the field, know what that means." She looked one last time at the broken man who had been her husband. His face was slack with shock, his empire crumbling around him on a stage of his own making. Without another word, Amelia Croft turned and walked off the stage, her back straight, her head held high. She did not look back. She walked out of the auditorium, out of the building, and out of the life that had almost destroyed her, leaving behind a storm of her own creation. The Queen had not just left the board. She had flipped the entire table. Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to the surface. It's a story of devastating betrayal, but also one of incredible strength and the fierce, unyielding power of a woman reclaiming her own narrative. The shattered watch was more than just a broken object. It was the sound of a gilded cage being smashed to pieces. What happens next? Does Julian's empire truly crumble? Does Amelia, with her newfound power and the impending birth of her child, find a new kind of happiness? The fallout from that day would echo for years to come. If this story captivated you, if you felt every moment of Amelia's pain and cheered for her ultimate triumph, please let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story of justice and resilience, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more gripping tales you won't want to miss. Click the notification bell so you're the first to know when our next story drops. Thank you for listening.